Hello students, it's Dr. Yu. In this lecture, we're going to talk about group innovation techniques. We've already learned how to run a meeting by having an agenda, facilitating questions and discussion properly, and closing the meeting and having minutes and all of those things. But what if you're in a situation where you need to innovate a solution to a problem? Perhaps you're in a problem-solving meeting or in an innovation meeting. Well, what I'm going to show you in this lecture are a couple of group innovation techniques that you can use that will help you facilitate good, creative brainstorming and problem solving. So let's go. First, you probably want to know what is basic problem solving. Basic problem solving is basically just overcoming an obstacle to achieve a goal. Anytime your organization or your group encounters an obstacle that you have to overcome together as a group, you will probably engage in this basic fact of life, which is problem solving. Now, if we were to look at problem solving a little bit more analytically, here's what we might say. When you're looking at basic problems, there are two sides of a spectrum that you can look at. First, there's always the undesirable situation that you're in. So actually think of this more as a timeline, if you will. So you're in this undesirable situation and here you are. Now, on the other side of the situation is the ideal or the goal. Perhaps your team is wanting to improve its turnover. Maybe your organization right now has very high turnover, meaning that a lot of people are quitting and not staying in their roles. So what your team needs to do is reduce turnover. So your undesirable situation then is that you have high turnover. Your goal would be lower turnover. Now, when you look at goals, you're going to be thinking of it either as we want more of something or we want less of something. Oops, got ahead of myself. Now, the issue that defines problems, of course, is the idea that there are obstacles. So obstacles are the things that get in the way that prevent the team from achieving its goal. Because if all we had to do was say, we have high turnover right now. Okay, we need low turnover. Okay, so cast the wand. Okay, so low turnover. And then it happens. There's not really any obstacles there. So generally when we're talking about a problem, we're talking about some kind of obstacle that we have to sometimes identify. Sometimes the obstacle is not known. What exactly is causing the turnover? What are the obstacles preventing us from reducing turnover? So part of your problem solving situation is first off, clearly defining the problem. So you have to define what the situation is. And then you have to have a clear goal, what you want to achieve by the end of the situation. So that's generally going to be more of something or less of something. And then you have to clearly identify what are the true obstacles and what are the true challenges and barriers that are preventing us from reaching our goal. Now, part of this ties into SMART goals. When you set a goal, like I said before, you generally should define it in terms of more or less of something, but you can even take it a step further. And those of you in project management, you probably have heard of this before, SMART goals. So when you set a goal, you want it to be specific. That means that you want it to be well-defined, something very clear and unambiguous. So when you say a specific goal for reducing employee turnover, what you want to do is you want to have some kind of policy, perhaps. So you just don't want to say our problem is high employee turnover, our goal is low employee turnover. That is the end result that you want. But then when you set a goal, what you're saying is we're going to try to achieve it through some particular method. So you want to make sure that you have a specific outcome that you want. So specific might mean in this department, we want to have a specific policy that everyone can have. Okay, so there you go. We want a specific policy. You want it to be measurable. So if you're going to say we're going to reduce turnover, we want to reduce it in this particular department, and we want it to be measurable. We want to reduce it by, let's say, 10%. 10% is measurable. You can look at 10% over the course of a year, and then you can say, okay, so we have definitely hit the 10% mark. You also want it to be attainable. If you're trying to reduce turnover, you want to make sure that you pick something that is going to be within your company's budget and means. So if you're trying to say we want to reduce it to 0%, but you have 1,000 employees and a lot of them are part-time workers that only do this for a side gig or something, that might be really hard to do. So you want to make sure when you set a goal, it's something that's going to be realistic. Which leads to the fourth part of SMART goals, which is that you want it to be relevant. A relevant goal should be something that is relevant to the actual problem. So whatever goal that you're going for, it should be related to whatever problem that you're addressing. Because you could set a goal, like let's say you really want to lose weight, so one of your SMART goals is you're going to start watching more Netflix. Like that's not really relevant to helping you losing weight, so it wouldn't make sense to set a goal there. Or with employee turnover, you want to reduce employee turnover, so one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to, add bus passes, and then has nothing to do with the true cause of the turnover for employees. Now, the last piece of a goal should be timely. And that means that when you set a goal, there is some kind of deadline that you can set, number one. So it should be a goal where you can set a deadline and be able to check on that goal at that specific time. And it should be something that is time bound. And so that means that you can look at it over a period of time and you can set between now and this period, it's going to be possible. And the other thing is you have to think of it in terms of when you set a goal, can this be done in a timely fashion? So if you're needing to reduce turnover next year, then you need to set it by next year. So that means any solution that you propose should be something that can yield results within a year. So you might have some great long-term ideas for achieving the goal, but it's not going to be timely enough. So whenever you set a goal, you want it to be timely, something that has a deadline. You always hear that goals are dreams with deadlines. Well, it's the same thing with SMART goals. Now, when we talk about problem solving generally, and we're just talking about it very generically right now, there are some generic approaches to problem solving, and so we're going to go through the very generic approach, and you probably learned this in middle school, but it's just good foundation, so then we get into the more complicated or the more sophisticated methods of problem solving. So here are the steps to problem solving, and you probably have learned this before. First, there's identify the problem. So you got to decide if you want more or less of something, and then decide what terms you need to define, who is harmed by the problem, and what the effects of the problem are. So this is kind of like your who, what, when, where, and why. What exactly is our problem? What is it that we want more of or less of? Or what is the specific harm that we're facing? And who is part of that issue? And what is exactly at play with this harm? Then secondly, you got to analyze the problem. Now, when you analyze the problem, you don't, a lot of people just want to rush into solutions, but you should make sure you have a deep understanding of the problem. So first, you should break the problem into pieces. So consider its causes, consider its effects, consider its symptoms, maybe do some historical research. Have we always had low turnover? Have employees been saying things that maybe have hinted at what might be causing the turnover in our company? Are there any limitations to existing methods that we tried? What have we tried in the past and has it worked? Have there been times when we had low turnover and then or high turnover and then we did something and it was cool? Or were there times when we had low turnover and then some company policy passed and then now we have high turnover? So break the problem to pieces. Secondly, develop criteria. So when you are looking at problem solving, you first have to define the problem. What exactly is the problem? Is it low or high turnover? Or is it something deeper? Is it just happiness? We just don't have any happiness in this company. Or something like that. But then you have to develop criteria. So what are some standards and goals for an acceptable solution? So this is where budget, timeline, approval, if you have to go through some bureaucratic hoops, all of these things are part of analyzing the problem and coming up with standards and criteria for an acceptable solution. Because otherwise you can propose a lot of solutions, but a lot of them may not be realistic, a lot of them might not be timely. And so SMART goals help you establish criteria for a solution. Then you want to generate possible solutions. So when you're with your team, and let's say you're calling a meeting, and you have identified the problem with your group of people, and maybe your team has done a good job of analyzing it and figuring out what some of the causes are, and who are the people involved and what their motivations are and what are your constraints. So once again, you have to not just think of the nature of the problem, but what are the constraints and the nature of the solution needed so that the solution is a workable solution to the problem. Now, we're going to go into depth on step 3 later in the lecture. So for now, just know step 3 is where you would do the brainstorming, as well as step 4. Now, in step 4, there are 3 different ways to pick a solution. So let's say in step 3, we did one of the brainstorming techniques that I'm going to teach you. And your group has came up with 2 or 3 possible solutions to the problem. How do you get agreement on one particular solution? Well, let's say you have a team of 5 people, or a team of 5 to 10 people, let's say. There's 3 different ways to pick the best solution. First, you can do ranking. What you would do is you would create a little ballot, and then you would have people rank best idea as number 1, second best idea is number 2, and third best idea is number 3. And then you just do golf scores, whichever idea has the lowest score. If you have 1 being the best, 2 being the second best, 3rd being the third best, and then the one that has the lowest score wins. So you can do that approach. So you would do some kind of ballot, and you would just have people rank the best ideas. Or you can do ratings. Instead of making people choose first, second, third, have everyone just rate the idea on quality. So the first idea on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you like that idea? And on the second idea on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you like that idea? Or on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you like the third idea? And then you can do a scoring system on that, and then whichever idea has the highest score, that would be the one that your group goes for. Or you can just vote. And this is probably what you've seen the most often is, okay, all in favor of idea 1. Everyone raises their hand. Okay, all in favor of idea 2. And all in favor of idea 3. So there are advantages and disadvantages to every style of voting. But you can see that if you think it's a very close call, like if your group is very split, where you think it's going to be a tie in voting, then it might be a better idea to go to a ranking or rating situation. Because then, if somebody's torn, at least you can see their thought process on, well, I really think idea number 1 is a 3, but I kind of think idea number 2 is a 4, but I kind of think idea number 3 is a 3, but then somebody else will have their specific numbers. So this is very broad, right? If you think about it, like this is a very broad approach to picking ideas, because it's either all or nothing for one or the other. With ranking, at least if you're torn between 2 ideas, you can still kind of give credence to 1 or 2 of the ideas. Of course, the best idea is going to get 1, but you can give some credence to the second idea. But rating is very nitpicky. It's not nitpicky, but it's just very, very laser, because you can see how each person felt about each idea versus up and down, but on a scale of 1 to 5. Then lastly, test the solution. So when you test the solution, you want to do some kind of pilot test on the solution. So you don't always have to, when you encounter a problem and finally came up with a solution, suddenly make it company-wide policy that everybody has to follow this solution now. What you can do is just do a pilot test. Maybe just do it in one department. And that can be kind of like a case study for the rest of the company. And then if it runs well in the department, then you have time to learn from the mistakes still that came from that department run. And then you can modify it and then implement it at a higher level, and then until the rest of the company comes along with it. You can also run it by an expert, and an expert can evaluate it as well. And then if they see some things from the outside, and that can help check back against groupthink, which we'll talk about later, then that works really well for your group too. So do pilot tests, consult experts. So this is overall the 5 steps to problem solving. You identify the problem. So you have to make sure you know what the problem is. The who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. Same with analyzing it. So then you analyze it, break it down into pieces, and make sure that people really understand what's going on with the problem. And also developing criteria for good solutions. So that's part of problem analysis. It isn't just analyzing the problem, but also projecting what criteria should a good solution meet. What are the constraints, if you will? Or in engineering, what are the specs of the solution? And then you generate the possible solutions. Now, the rest of this lecture is going to be focused on number 3. So how do I generate possible solutions? I'm going to show you. And then you pick the best solution. So depending if you're doing ranking, rating, or voting, you're going to decide which one's the best there. And then you test the solution. And if the test solution works well, then you know that you can put some money on that problem then. In lecture 2, we'll talk about solution generating and some brainstorming techniques that you can use to help generate solutions to those problems that you talked about. See you there.